Hungary only recently took over the leadership of one of the EU's top bodies. As president of the Council of the European Union, Viktor Orban has already ruffled feathers in Brussels. So what exactly is he trying to achieve? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the presidency of the Council of the EU rotates once every 6 months. Hungary's Viktor Orban is using his term to push through his nationalist agenda in Europe and end the war in Ukraine. But will his abrasive style help or hinder his cause?
Viktor Orban says he wants to make Europe great again. And he is using Hungary's 6-month presidency of the Council of the European Union to first and foremost protect his country's interests.
If we want to defend Hungary's freedom and sovereignty, we have no other choice but to occupy Brussels.
His other priority is reaching a quick end to the war in Ukraine, but he's doing that his way. First came Kiev and a meeting with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. The smiles and handshakes appear to signal a thaw in their previously frosty relations. But it was his next stop that raised the fury of EU leaders. Orban said meeting Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow was part of his peace mission.
I wanted to find out what the shortest way to peace is.
A firestorm of tweets from high-ranking European leaders followed. Charles Michel, President of the European Council, not to be confused with the Council of the European Union. He said Orban has no mandate to engage with Russia on behalf of the European Union. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said appeasement will not stop Putin. And Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas said Orban is exploiting the EU presidency to sow confusion. Being one of Europe's lawmaking bodies, the Council and its president have considerable influence on the region and beyond. The Council negotiates and adopts EU laws together with the European Parliament based on proposals from the European Commission. It coordinates EU countries' policies. And it develops the EU's foreign and security policy based on guidelines developed by the European Council, a body comprising heads of state. Orban is keen to make his mark on the world stage. And in keeping with his style, doesn't seem to care who he offends to achieve that.
Let's meet our guests. Joining us from Dublin is Frances Fitzgerald. She's a former member of the European Parliament from Ireland and a former Deputy Prime Minister of Ireland. Frances is currently an advisor to the G7 on equality. In Budapest, we find Mariann Ory. She is managing editor of Eurasia magazine. And here with me in the studio is Paul Ingram, research affiliate at the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Frances, I'll come to you first. From your years of experience with the European Parliament and European politics, just spell out for our viewers how important the rotating presidency is and, you know, the kind of power it does carry.
Well, it's very important, I believe, from both a symbolic, symbolizing the values of the EU, symbolizing the work of the EU. So symbolically, I see it as very important, and countries are very proud to do the presidency, and they're kind of rated on how well they have done or haven't done. But it's also responsible for driving and influencing. If you're chairing something, you can do quite a bit in terms of influencing agendas. So it's about shaping the agenda and making sure EU legislation progresses. And it can progress quickly or slowly, depending on the presidency and the priorities that it has. So that's very important, and driving the EU's work on legislation. And I think coordinating economic policies and responding to current issues. And I mean, we are in such a challenging situation at present with the war in Ukraine, the challenges geopolitically, not to speak of this week, electing a president of the Commission, a president of the Parliament, setting up the committees. So it's very much the start time of this mandate. So that's equally critical to have a steady hand on the ship at this point.
Mariann, just give us the Hungarian perspective. What do you think are the priorities for Viktor Orban and Hungary for the 6 months of the presidency?
Well, the main priority of the presidency is competitiveness, because the Hungarian government position is that Europe is lagging behind the rest of the world in competitiveness, and there are other priorities also from migration and economic issues, but the main focal point is competitiveness. And well, the goal of the Hungarian government, which they have said in numerous occasions, is to act as an honest broker in the next 6 months, and to go through smoothly to all of the challenges, such as the new parliament, the setting up of the new commission, and this whole process.
Paul, I come to you as the head of the presidency for 6 months. Can Orban change anything? I mean, what are the restrictions here? Is it just a figurehead role, really?
It's more than a figurehead role. I think, as we've heard, the occupant of this position has the ability to frame, shape conversation, debate, and represent the European Union in certain ways, and perhaps nudge it in one direction or another, as he's clearly trying to do.
And we've noticed recently what's being called freelance diplomacy. He's headed off to Kyiv, Moscow, Beijing, and Mar-a-Lago in Florida to see Donald Trump. So that was quite a whirlwind tour.
Yes, and I think what it shows is that Viktor Orban is looking to step into a leadership role. This is not in and of itself a bad thing. And actually, I think, from my perspective, the sort of things that he was saying and the responses he was getting was quite encouraging. It is quite clear that the war in Ukraine is deeply damaging to Russia and to the European Union, and of course, most of all, to Ukraine. And it's important that we look and search for ceasefire and peace opportunities. And that requires people to talk across boundaries, to talk to people that they may disagree with, and to find solutions, or at least some kind of interim ways of having a ceasefire. The talk at the moment in Ukraine is relatively positive. We've had Zelensky himself talk about peace proposals that are new. We've also had President Putin start talking about proposals. So I think it is the time now for European leaders to be talking across these boundaries. And if it takes Viktor Orban to do it, then that's better than nobody.
Francis, Viktor Orban says that Hungary is the only country that can speak to everyone. Have you any concerns about him heading off and, taking it upon himself to be the EU chief spokesperson, going to Moscow, going to Beijing, and also going to see Donald Trump?
Yes, I do, actually. I mean, I quite agree with Mariann, and it's good to hear about the focus on competitiveness. Let me just say that to begin with, Enda, because we have the Draghi report coming up, and I think Viktor Orban would find a lot of support if Hungary leads on that whole question of, especially with the changes in the United States potentially, the economic sort of plans for Europe, because we do need to have more innovation, more support for business and so on. But onto your question, I think the problem in relation to the diplomacy has been doing, that in some ways it is self-styled. And as the chair, as the president of the EU, what other member states would like to see, and this is very clear, they would like to see these, if he is going to do these visits, I take Paul's point, you sometimes have to go beyond obvious boundaries, especially in conflict situations. But there is a feeling that he's not reflecting the foreign policy positioning of the EU at present, that he takes it upon himself, that the way he talks about the peace deal is not reflecting the EU's approach to Ukraine, because it isn't peace at any price. We do want Ukraine to win this war, no question, because we do believe it's an attack on democracy. And so there is concern, so much so that there is, really serious talk about a lack of support from foreign ministers for the initiatives that Hungary might take in relation to their own foreign policy meetings and so on over the next period. So I think there is concern. I certainly see it everywhere. And, a shift could make a difference. But the point is that really, I mean, this is the way that Orban does position himself, to be different as opposed to be part of the EU. And he does constantly, put barriers and challenges in decision making within the EU, including in relation to support for Ukraine and aid to Ukraine. That's the most recent. So from an EU-wide perspective, it is problematic. And it seems to me that it's like I'd be interested in Mariann's view. This is how he wants to position himself and get the attention that derives from that, as opposed to a more cooperative approach, which would be the norm for presidencies.
Well, let's come to Mariann on that. Mariann, what's your take on the whirlwind of diplomacy that Viktor Orban recently undertook?
Well, I think that the Prime Minister, he is definitely using the attention and the focus which is in Hungary for holding the EU presidency. But he made it clear that he's not speaking in the name of the EU because he has no mandate for that. And of course, politicians in Brussels are reminding it of him, like after every trip. But he did make it clear that he is not speaking in the name of all the members of the EU, especially because the Hungarian government and also Mr. Orban is saying openly that Hungary does not agree with the majority of the EU countries when it comes to the war in Ukraine, that we have a different position. So it is about the attention and the focus, and certainly he wants to act as an envoy, also as an honest broker, so to say, in this regard too, saying that his position and his opportunity to talk to all these major players and to be on good terms with them, that this is an opportunity that should be used rather than dismissed.
Well, Viktor Orban's trip to Russia and China was warmly received in those two countries. Let's have a listen to, first of all, Vladimir Putin's spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, and then a spokesperson for the Chinese government.
There is a whole set of disagreements among the parties concerned, but at least Mr. Orban is making a very serious attempt to understand the essence of these disagreements, which is very much appreciated.
During the meeting, President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Orban exchanged views on bilateral relations, China-Europe relations and issues of common concern. The two sides focused on in-depth communication on the Ukraine crisis. Prime Minister Orban briefed on his recent visit to Ukraine and Russia. President Xi appreciated Prime Minister Orban's efforts to promote a political solution to the Ukrainian crisis and elaborated on China's relevant views and ideas.
Paul, do you welcome this kind of freelance diplomacy that Viktor Orban has embarked upon?
Well, it's needed. I feel profoundly uncomfortable as a Democrat looking at a semi-autocrat doing this kind of diplomacy. But quite frankly, as I said earlier, better him than nobody. And the response he's getting is constructive. And I do think that it is time for us to talk from Europe towards Russia and to draw China into the conversation too. China has a lot to bring to this peace table. Zelensky attempted to pull together a very broad coalition of states in the peace summit about a month ago, and the general consensus amongst analysts is that it was only half successful. And the reason for that was largely because it wasn't a peace summit. It was to drum up support for the continuation of the war. Now, I understand why the Europeans are wanting to continue the war and to defend democracy and the territorial integrity of states. But I think we also have to be realistic and to see where the war is and what the realistic possibilities are. And there are thousands of people losing their lives on a weekly basis on the front lines of that war. And we cannot afford for this to just drag on and on. The Ukrainians have lost more than a third of their population from the country. The state is going in the wrong direction when it comes to democracy and tackling corruption. And the war is a big running sore. And we just can't afford to carry it on. So I think we have to compromise. And I think Viktor Orban's, I don't know what was said behind the scenes in private. I hope that there were constructive conversations there. What was said in public encouraged me.
Francis, can he be a useful addition to the leadership in the EU? I know there are a lot of concerns about selfish interests and what Viktor Orban is doing, but do you think he could actually be a very key peacemaker when it comes to getting this conflict resolved?
Not really. I don't actually. I mean, I think there's a number of issues that I would take up from the previous conversation. One is the kind of boundary confusion between what he's doing as Prime Minister and as President of the EU. That needs to be made of the presidency. That needs to be made very clear. That's the first point, and I think he's probably playing on both. Secondly, it's not that Europe wants the war to continue. It doesn't, obviously. But I'd be much more comfortable if I heard Prime Minister Orban calling on Russia to stop its aggression. I mean, it is Russia who has invaded Ukraine. It is Russia who's advancing on Ukraine. Ukraine is defending itself. And of course, if there are going to be peace moves, I would see Joseph Borrell and his successor as the person to do that. I'm not sure, and of course, if it works, so be it. But I'm not sure that Prime Minister Orban, both recent past positioning, current positioning, is going to lead to the type of breakthrough that Paul is suggesting is needed. And of course, breakthroughs are needed, no doubt about that. But I think, from a European perspective, I mean, what we want to see is actually team playing on this. And, working, of course, to end the war and resolve the issues. But I would like to hear Prime Minister Orban call on Russia to stop its aggression and to, make his views on Russian action clear. And I think there's a lot of ambivalence being shown about that from him. And while it looks dramatic going from one country to another, I would be suspicious about it, and I certainly would need to be convinced on what that achieves.
Mariann, I noticed there is a foreign affairs summit that Viktor Orban is organising for Budapest at the end of August. And no sooner had he announced those plans than people in Brussels are announcing plans for a foreign ministers get-together elsewhere to kind of pull the rug from under Orban. Is that what we're likely to see in the next few months, that he does one thing and then Brussels reins him back in a little bit?
Certainly, we can see it now also because the Commission said that they will only be represented on the informal summits on a senior civil servant level, so on a rather low level. I don't think that this attitude leads to anything positive, really, because, certainly there can be different opinions about Prime Minister Orban's stance on the Ukraine war and his travels, but we can definitely say, I think, that the whole program of the presidency is organized very professionally. There is no, should I say, trolling or unprofessionalism or provocation or anything that some people feared of. So I think it would be a more constructive thing from the Commission side, not to act like a political body, but to act like as the European Commission, and to just get through this presidency.
Paul, give us your take on two foreign affairs summits, one that he's organised and one that Brussels is saying that this is where you need to be, to all the foreign ministers.
Well, I do think the intention is not honourable. I do think that we need to tolerate diversity within Europe. Europe is a continent of difference, and that this obsession with unity can sometimes go far too far. And we should be believing in liberal democracy, which means that even when a leader like Viktor Orban is elected, we need to recognise that this is a country that is part of the European Union and deserves to be part of the European Union, and not to play these games. But on the other hand, there is, I think, a lot to be said for tolerating the diversity. So if foreign ministers have a good reason to get together elsewhere, then they should get together elsewhere.
Do you think shouldn't be forced? Is he being deliberately undermined here?
Yeah, well, I think that's almost certainly the case. But that is in response to the disagreement over the issues that we've been talking about. It's not because he was going to be sidelined right from the start. But this is why I feel on this debate, in this moment, I feel very clearly I'm on Viktor Orban's side, because we need to be on the side of talking. And Viktor Orban is not going to solve this problem. He's only going to be one of a number, but he is leading by example, and we need to follow. We need to start talking. So those of us that go to Moscow and other cities like this to talk should not be vilified, should not be excluded, but should actually be a source of serious conversation.
People say he's too close to Vladimir Putin.
Well, yes, and people say that about me too. It's not true. It's because those of us who actually do go to Moscow and talk about these things with leaders that we find objectionable and detestable by some of their actions, we still have to talk, because the alternative is that we will end up blowing ourselves up, all of us. And that is a price I don't think any of us should be contemplating.
Francis, give us your take on Orban's relationship then with the Russians and Putin in particular. Is he too close to Vladimir Putin?
Who knows, really? I mean, that's the real question. I think it's in his own hands. If he did want to really be a leader in terms of peace, why not do it in a way that is supportive of the EU and is in tandem with the EU? It's in his own hands to do it in that type of way. He chooses not to. And who knows really what his goal is? I mean, Paul presents it as, it's to bring peace. I think it's more about himself, actually. Now, I would say that Hungary in the presidency, I've no doubt that from a day-to-day basis, a day-to-day operation, Hungary will do a good job. And I'm informed very reliably that, as Mariann says, the organisation and so on is extremely good. But I think in terms of leading a peace process, I think Paul is projecting quite a lot onto Orban that I don't think he deserves at this point. Of course, you have to have diversity. Of course, when you're trying to deal with conflict situations, you need creative thinking and you need leadership. But certainly, if that's what Orban wants to do, there is a way that he could do it. That would actually bring other people with him. And I would much prefer, and the EU generally would much prefer to see that. If he has these great links with China and with Putin, why not do it in a way that brings other people with him and understands the EU approach? After all, he is representing the EU institutions in this very important role of president.
Mariann, just give us the Hungarian perspective. When you see your Prime Minister jetting around the world, how does the average Hungarian feel when there's a cost of living crisis, you have migration on your front pages on a regular basis in Hungary, as we do in other countries in Europe? How does the average Hungarian voter feel seeing Viktor Orban jet around the world doing all this international diplomacy?
Well, one of the main drivers of the crisis that we have all over Europe is the war, which is for Hungary also a special situation because it is in our immediate neighborhood, in a country where also there is a significant Hungarian minority. So I think the most Hungarians, and also the election results also show that most Hungarians appreciate the effort that the Prime Minister is doing to somehow solve the situation. Of course, we know, and of course also Prime Minister Orban is also acknowledging that Hungary alone cannot solve the situation because we are only a small country in Central Europe, but he can try to talk to the major players who can actually solve the situation, and he has also very high hopes for the next U.S. president to be Donald Trump, and probably he will have a different approach to this war, because the main problem of the Hungarian government is, which they have been saying on numerous occasions, is that the general talk in European politics is that we should help Ukraine with money and with weapons as long as it takes for Ukraine to beat Russia. The Hungarian position is that we should strive for at least a ceasefire and end in a peace. And of course, those who are involved can agree on the conditions, but we are not interested in an ongoing war.
Paul, I'll come back to you just on the 6 months presidency that Hungary now has. How excited are you to see what he does? I mean, can he make a difference?
That's a big question. I don't have a strong confidence that Hungary's 6 months presidency is going to make a big difference to the European Union. I think there are all sorts of reasons for that. I'm not a particularly strong fan of Viktor Orban as a politician or where he comes from in the political spectrum. I think the actions of the European Commission in response demonstrates that they're more interested in isolating than collaborating. So I think the most likely outcome, as somebody who's watching from afar, is that there won't be a great deal of progress, one way or another. But my hope is that, at least in this area, that Viktor Orban can make a difference in terms of nudging Europe in a more constructive direction when it comes to actively seeking ceasefire opportunities, because there are people in Ukraine, inside the government and elsewhere, that are looking for this now in ways that were more serious than they were a month or two ago. And as I said earlier, there are people in Russia who are also looking for this.
Francis, Mariann in Budapest, and Paul here with me in the studio. Thank you all so much for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. And if you like what you see there, please do hit that subscribe button. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.